Hello and welcome to Illumination Podcast with Nick and Kizma. I am Kizma and I'm really excited for today's episode. We're going to be talking about qualities of a leader and not just any kind of leader. We're going to be talking about the leader that is inspiring, that has positivity, that carries the energy of a room, that is successful in all ways of being, doing, and having. So stay tuned for Illumination Podcast, Qualities of a Leader. Hello and welcome to Illumination Podcast with Nick and Kizma, bringing you ancient wisdom for modern day success so that you can have the mindset to get your life and business set.
As always, thank you for tuning in. And if you're new to the podcast, take a quick second to hit the subscribe button in iTunes, SoundCloud, or Stitcher. If you want to get the inside info for this and every episode, as well as some free gifts, go to illuminationacademy.net/podcasts. And now let's dive in to get your mindset for your life and business set.
Well, hello there, Nick.
Hello there, Kizma.
What's going on with you?
It's a podcast day.
Podcast day. We love our podcast day over here at Common Grounds in Carlsbad.
Podcasting is happening.
It is happening.
It's chilly. It's warm outside, but I'm actually kind of like, I got my shorts and a t-shirt on.
The air conditioner's on.
You're giving me flashbacks of when I used to work in like a cubicle, and they would like, it would be really hot outside, but then they would be freezing cold and ice cold inside. I just could never stand that.
Tricky.
Yeah. It's a thing though.
It is a thing. Yeah. And even though it's hot outside, it's gorgeous Carlsbad, San Diego weather. So we can't really complain.
There's no complaining. No.
None at all.
No.
Well, I'm excited about this episode today. It's basically inspired by a book I've been reading called Lead the Field. And this book is by Earl Nightingale. If some of our listeners aren't familiar, we will have definitely a link to the book in the show notes, illuminationacademy.net/podcasts, and look for this episode. And Earl Nightingale was one of those evolved humans. He actually served as a Marine in World War II and then became a well-known broadcast personality. And I feel like he was one of those leaders, speakers that understood not just spiritual laws, but basic laws of being an amazing human and a great leader. And so his book, Lead the Field, most of it is, from what I'm gathering, certainly things I've studied again and again and again, but sometimes it's just really cool to hear it in a different voice, in a different way. And so today we're going to go through a couple of his steps to creating this attitude of a high quality leader.
So where did you find some really interesting books. Like, where did you even find this book?
I found this one from, I think it was Chris Winfield of Unfair Advantage. Working with Chris in his, I guess you could say, his mastermind group. And he loves books. You know, when I met Chris, it was like, oh yeah, we both read Florence Scovel Shinn. I hooked him up with Catherine Ponder. He's the one that also loves The Power of the Subconscious Mind. So it's just like those older books, the energy is so different. It
is really different. Yeah. And that's one of the things I really appreciate about them.
Yeah.
The language is different. Your brain has to translate it in a different way.
For sure.
It's not our conversational text speak kind of thing. It's actually a little more formal in certain ways, but it's cleaner as well.
Yeah.
I was just looking, because you mentioned that he's in World War II. I was super curious, and I just Wikipedia'd him really quick. He was 17 years old when he joined the Marine Corps, and he was on the USS Arizona during the Pearl Harbor attack.
Wow.
And he was one of 15 surviving surviving Marines aboard that ship that day.
Wow.
Think about that for a second.
So Earl Nightingale, his attitude, his perception of life must have just shifted dramatically.
Yeah, he's a young dude 17 years old when he joined, so he couldn't have been more than 20 years old.
Yeah. To be on that ship. Wow.
One of 15 that survived. So, okay, well, that puts this in a little bit of a different context.
Yeah, right.
Didn't know.
He knows what he's talking about.
Super excited to dive in here and see what Mr. Nightingale has to say.
Well, let's talk about it. We always talk about attitude because what's going on in our mind and our emotions are dialed together. Of course, we always talk about energy bodies as well, but I think when we're having a day that might be off and we look at our attitude, we're going to see a direct correlation. If we're feeling funky emotionally, sometimes even physically, and we examine our thoughts, what we're thinking, what we're focused on, our attitude, chances are if we can pivot that attitude and the thoughts, we're going to feel better right away.
Yeah, totally. We did a whole series, remember?
We did.
Attitude adjustment.
Yeah, go back to the attitude of adjustment, guys. It's so good.
That was a fun one. I really enjoyed
it was a fun one. And it's the title sounds like we're being school teachers. We're not. It's a really good series. So you can find that in, just Google down or search down our podcast list.
But here in the context of leadership, I think this is...
attitude is everything.
And especially coming from someone of his stature.
Right.
I can't wait to hear about it.
So we're going to dive into some basic points, but so worth, and I don't know why I'm saying but today. Remove that but, and so relevant.
Cool.
So let's look at a few here. In his book, again, Lead the Field, here's one that really got to me. Our attitude, say a human's attitude at the beginning of a difficult task, will determine the outcome and the way the human is being throughout that challenge. So what this meant to me was that oftentimes we can come up against something that's difficult, awkward, seemingly impossible. And if the attitude isn't of a higher level of, I'm going to get through, above, beyond this, we can easily go sideways.
Yeah, that's for sure. Now, this may be a tedious question. I'm not sure if this is even really relevant, but for me, there are certainly big tasks where I look at them and my very first feeling is like, oh crap, that's a big deal. Now, as I start to chunk it down and to just let myself sit with that, then I start to get excited about things like, oh, I could do this and I could do that. And I start thinking about ways that I can achieve this or make it work or put a plan in place. And then I get excited, more and more excited about it. Am I stuck at that very first one? Because that is not always my first reaction.
It's not. Well, he says first, it's our attitude at the beginning of a difficult task, which will more than anything else will bring about its successful outcome. So
the beginning of it or the first thing?
Oh, dude, you're mixing words. I look at it this way. If you're approaching a difficult, tedious task and you don't have a more compelling ideal to get through it and on it, you're going to have that same reaction. It's like, oh.
Okay.
So it's the pivot, right? It's the pivot of the attitude when you see it like that and you're wondering how, which can make for some really interesting thoughts. Get back to that compelling ideal. Why am I doing this? Right. What's the purpose? What's the ideal? And then I do think that's when the attitude shifts. And that's when we get excited. And then that's when we're able to chunk things out, make our lists, map it out, understand when we're going to do it, etc.
Got it. Okay. I may have been taking that a little bit too literally, but the pivot that you described is really...
pivot, right? We can always pivot. So if we approach something, it's not the attitude that's going to bring about a successful outcome, pivot the attitude. And that usually pivots. These are not his words. These are my words. Usually pivots when we have a more compelling ideal as to the reason we're doing this task, taking on the challenge, maybe even having an awkward conversation, whatever it is.
Right. Yeah. Simon Sinek would call that knowing your why.
Right.
And I think that's part of it, but it seems like there's more to it. There's more, to me anyway, there's more to an ideal than just a why.
Well, why is an internal identification. An ideal is something that's bigger than all of us.
Yeah.
So I go for the ideal.
Yeah.
I get it. The why can be an ideal, but I feel like in that language, it's your why. Like we're already labeling it as ours.
Yeah.
Yeah. At the higher perspective, ideal is for humanity.
Yeah. It kind of connects you to that.
Right.
Yeah. That's cool.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So, all right, I can do that.
You can do that. We can all do that. Take a breath, everyone. Like, okay, I got this. It might just be that simple. Like, I got this. I got this. Let's go.
But this will be a fun one for everybody to walk through. Like, what's the big task on your plate right now? You know,
what's the challenge? Yeah. What's the struggle? And your attitude at the beginning of it.
Yeah. What's your attitude towards it?
Exactly. And do everything you can to pivot. And usually that pivot will come from just being re-inspired as to why you are doing it.
Yeah. Oh, that's really interesting. Okay, cool.
Cool, right? Yeah, I know. So simple, but I was like, oh, this is good.
Well, that's the thing is like with so many of these too, it doesn't, they're so simple, but that's the best part.
Yeah.
Actually,
right.
It's that they're not complicated.
Right.
And where the mind gets stuck in these, this is just a little interlude on, for my behalf and certainly for everybody else who sometimes gets even confused or stuck around simplicity. Okay. The first, when it's really simple, your mind can have that tendency of like, oh, I know that. I got that. Dive a little deeper.
Yeah, go deeper.
That's where the real gold lies.
Yes.
And that's the beauty of simplicity is it allows that easy in to get to a deeper layer.
Right.
Rather than just kind of floating around on the surface with a really flowery concept.
Exactly.
It's so simple. What's your attitude? Yeah. What's your attitude about the big goal of the big project that you got?
Absolutely.
And if you set it straight from the beginning, it's going to be, what I'm reading from that is if you set it straight from the beginning, it's going to be 100 times easier every step of the way through because you've got that anchor for yourself.
And to be successful with it on the other side.
Okay,
pretty cool, right?
Yeah, I'm excited. Let's
go on to the next one. He says, secondly, our attitudes towards others determine their attitudes towards us. Didn't our grandmothers say this like all the time? But it's true. Our attitudes towards others determine their attitudes towards us. We're all interdependent. So we talk about this all the time, guys, from the spiritual and energetic context. And he's saying it here, we're all interdependent. The success we achieve in life will depend largely on how well we relate to others. This is so key. So much of what we do is relational. And if we're entering, whether it's a relationship online, whether it's someone that we work with in person, whether it's family, intimate, our attitude towards them will determine at a very strong percentage their attitude back. Now, of course, sometimes we have to deal with people. None of you out there are this. Some maybe grumpy, grouchy people. And we're really wanting, like we're very much trying to give that positive attitude. And it can seem frustrating because maybe we're not getting it back like we're giving it. Here's where I go is like, just think what it would be like if we were meeting them with grumpiness. How much worse would it be? So I'm not saying we can change people, yet it's that karma, right? The cause and effect. What we give out, we get back. And energetically, you'll be amazed what an attitude going to someone in a positive way can do to return back to you.
Yeah. Well, if you're having trouble with that, go back and find our episodes on forgiveness, which we just did a few weeks ago. Go back and find the episode on relationships. I know we've talked about that a few different times. And then there's an attitude. There's one in there on the attitude of self-love that's way back in the archives. And all of those are good for that. And I think about it as a shift in attention. So my attitude, when I look at my attitude towards other people, it's not hard to find flaw. You look at humans are all human-y. Like they're so human-y and they got things going on. I know I'm a human being too. I'm sure I can only imagine what it's like to live with me. And
interesting.
And it takes zero effort to shift your attention to how amazing that person is.
It really does.
It takes zero more
It will
effort.
use up in fact, it'll use less energy from your human to see what is great in that person rather than focus what isn't working. That uses more energy.
Exactly. And what's important, I think, to understand though, is that we have been trained through our education system to look for problems. Everything that we do in education is about looking for the problem and solving the problem.
Right.
What's the problem? What's the thing that we're trying to solve? And when we take that and look at other humans, well, what do you see? You see a bunch of problems. You see a big whole bundle of problems.
Right.
And that is not productive for having a really healthy attitude towards that person.
Right. Exactly.
Sure, it can be useful if you're in the role of leadership in order to help those people overcome those things and to be in their best. And if you relate to them as their problems, you're going to have more problems and you're going to bring out more problems in that person. And if you shift your attention, which again requires zero effort, to those positive things, now you get to have a relationship with all those positive qualities. And it's really about who do you choose to have a relationship with?
And who are you choosing to be?
Absolutely.
Really good. Yeah, I love that. Great insight. And now let's move on. He says, before you can achieve the kind of life, this is so good. Before you can achieve the kind of life you want, you must think, act, talk, and conduct yourself in all of your affairs as would the person you wish to become. Keep a mental picture of that person before you as often as you can during the day. This blew my mind because it took me back to the Bhagavad Gita. I think it's chapter 2, where the teachings are, how is it that you sit, you speak, and you walk amongst your fellow man?
Yeah.
And of course, the Gita is all about self-actualization, self-realization. So it's like that question is, how are you speaking with people? How are you sitting? How are you being with them? How are you holding space? How are you walking amongst them?
Yeah.
What are your actions like with them?
Yeah.
And this is it. Is like what you want to create. Then who is the person that needs to be that? For our coaches out there, I always think about, okay, I'm always striving to be the best coach I can. So what kind of person do I need to be? That's why I do my own work. That's why I do my own research. That's why I'm always working on myself and wanting to evolve to be at that highest level.
Yeah. I like how he's not telling you like what that is though.
It's your mental picture.
He's like, you get to decide.
Right.
Who do you want to be?
Right.
And whatever that is to you, in simplest terms, it's like, be your best self, everybody.
Be your best self now.
Be your best self now.
Right.
But that's important in order to, and I think it's something that's really easy to forget, is to make the conscious decision about who you want to be and who you're choosing to be in any particular moment.
Right. And then be it.
Yeah. Then
and then just be it.
Go do that.
Right.
Right. So what's interesting here, I'm looking back a little bit. He's Long Beach. He's a California guy.
Oh,
okay. So he was born in 1921. That is.
Is he still alive?
No. Let's see when.
Was he be like 97 or something?
Yeah, he died in 1989.
Oh. Wow. Young.
His father abandoned his mother during 1933. So in the Depression. And after his father left, his mother relocated the family to a tent in nearby Tent City. Think about that.
Wow.
And that's his attitude. That's what he learned from that is be your best self.
Be your best self.
And if I'm going to be and he could very well have just got stuck in poverty.
Right.
And stayed like that.
Until he didn't.
But he chose to be somebody different.
Yeah.
And I think that's amazing.
That's amazing, man. The power of the mind and the imagination. Oh, so good, right?
Yeah. So he would have been, 12 years old when his father took off. Yep, 12 years old. Think about that.
Wow.
12-year-old kid.
And then joined the Marines at
5
17.
years later, he joined the Marines. Yeah.
Found a way. Amazing. Love that. Now, this next one is great for those of you that own a business, run a business, work in a company, or aspire to do any of these. And I also look at it in organizations of maybe even family, spiritual. But he says, remember that the higher you go in any organization of value, keyword is of value, the better the attitudes you'll find. So let me repeat that. The higher you go in any organization of value, the better the attitudes you'll find. And that attitudes are not the result of success. Success is the result of great attitudes. Write this down. Attitudes are not the result of success. Success is the result of great attitudes. That is something I've been contemplating every single day since I started reading this book.
You think about, if everybody at the lower level of this organization is, they're kind of in a negative space or something like that. It's like, well, what are you going to find at the top? But in order for people to really ascend up, they need positive attitude. I never really looked at it like that. I never really thought about it like that. But that's true. Like the people that I've seen who are uber successful and have talked with and have relationships with, they're always really awesome people to hang out with.
I know. Well, and then take it to the law of attraction, manifesting, the law of mind action. A great attitude is one that is manifesting greatness. because we're always manifesting. So he's putting the spiritual on a very simple way, but very profound. We're always manifesting. So if our attitude is crappy, we're going to manifest that kind of stuff around us. If we have a great attitude, and this is where I want to inspire everyone every single moment, day in, day out, choose that great attitude. It is a choice. It's a pivot. It's a choice. It's giving yourself space. It's making sure that you're, fueling yourself. Have a great attitude. You will create great success.
Yeah. And as you ascend, how I look at it, like energetically, is like how you ascend up and through that. Like basically it's in training from the top down. Mm-hmm. You could see it in a family.
Yeah.
Where, people are going to entrain to the parents.
Yeah.
The kids are going to entrain for the parents. The pets are going to entrain for the parents, which is not always. Yeah. Anyway, Leonard sometimes is freaking out. Then I only have myself to look at.
Or me.
Anyway, so they entrain. And as you go, it seems like from the very top, like if it's a big organization, at the very top, you're going to find the most true energy to that organization. And as it filters down, there becomes more and more interference.
Right.
And so it gets into some of those lower levels, which is understandable.
Right.
Oftentimes somebody who has been in the lowest level of that organization for a number of years and not moved up in it, they're probably not going to have the greatest attitude.
Right.
But you find people that come in through those same jobs and then ascend up through the organization, whether it's the company or the military or whatever the case may be, and they find their proper place within that structure because they're in training to the energy.
Exactly.
And it's their own ability. And I think, this is just my own theory here, their own willingness or availability to be open to that higher vibe.
Exactly. Absolutely. One has to have willingness. I mean, that goes back to, the chart of frequency of David Hawkins, power versus force. Willingness, being willing is where we want people to get to.
Right.
Because when they're willing, they'll make a shift.
You're malleable at that point. You're soft enough to be malleable,
right.
which
And you're
is really
able,
important.
Yeah, to have your head above water and to face forward.
Yeah. And I think that's really important because it's not about not having your lower stuff at all. And we're human beings. We have lower emotions. We have all these things. And if you're stuck in that, and bobbing below water, well, you're just going to keep all that and you're going to stay where you are. But it's getting to that point of willingness where, of course, when you start to move up in an organization, you need to be malleable. You need to learn.
Right. Exactly.
And really take the leadership that's given. Like one of the greatest examples for me was when I worked at the Detroit Symphony, my boss and mentor there, Stephen Molina, was personnel manager. He's one of the greatest peoples. He's really holds a special place in my heart for so many years now. And I struggled sometimes to be open to the teachings and the lessons. And it was really in retrospect that I realized what a gift he was and what a gift I had.
That can happen in retrospect. I get it.
And especially towards the end where I was like ready to leave and that, I know I missed some treasures there and he's a really wonderful person. Not that I'm like living in regret or anything, but it's important in hindsight. My point of the whole thing is that it's really about staying in that super available state that lets you continue to ascend up.
Right.
Let yourself be swept up in the positive attitudes of others. That you're not a joiner for that. You're being a part of something greater. Right. And I think that's super cool.
It's amazing. Good. Okay,
cool.
Love it.
Yeah. Wow. It's really digging this. What's next?
The attitudes are not the result of success. Success is the result of great attitudes. So there's one other thing that we're going to mention today, and we might be circling back to this topic again, but this is really beautiful. He says, the deepest craving of a human being is for recognition and self-esteem, to be needed, to feel important, to be recognized and appreciated. That includes our loved ones and all the people with whom we come in contact during our days. Now, from the work we've done, Nick, like especially with the Ultimate Life Tool Assessment, we know that people have a different way of expressing that or communicating that. But I feel like he's getting to the core. Like there is a deep craving for people to be recognized and appreciated and to build this essence of self-esteem so that they know They're on the planet for a reason.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. I don't think he's wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And my question is, okay, well, that's true. And what's the difference between that and then being codependent or dependent on that of others in order to be your best?
Here's my thought, because that is a really good question, right? If all we're doing is seeking someone else to give that to us, we miss the internal connection.
Yeah.
What I feel he's saying here is when we know this, we then treat people with such amazing respect and appreciation. So again,
got it.
What we give out, we're going to get back. When we just see, and in his, alluding even the loved ones, I think he's saying, avoid treating your family, your husband, your wife, your partner, like you don't care because you think there's unconditional love. They too have this great need of that internal self-esteem and recognition.
Yeah.
So number one, when we treat them that way, just because it's of a higher value, when we see that, like you were saying earlier, when we can see that full potential in them, we are going to get that back without the attachment and codependency. It's like, it's a cleaner vibe. It's an essence of how people are seeing one another.
Okay.
And treating one another.
Yeah, I get it. That's a really great explanation. I think context is important. I think I was taking it a little bit more into the absolute context. He's really looking at here in leadership, the context of leadership.
How are you going to treat the people around you?
And people do, I think that's true. People do need to be appreciated for what they do. Like, who wants to just do a whole bunch of work and, not be appreciated in any way, shape, or form for that? Like, that sucks. Like, that doesn't feel good for anybody, even if the person's like, oh, shucks, or anything like that.
It might be completely objective. I think it just at a deeper level.
Yeah.
We need to remind ourselves why we're here. This is why human connection is so important.
Well, it's easy to take the people closest to you for granted.
It really is. Yeah. So avoid that, everyone. And I love these. They're so simple, yet very profound, very rich. And, final thought here is that we get to choose every moment of what we're thinking. And are we holding the highest possible thoughts of self and others at every point in time? I know that feels like a big ask because the world's upside down and all around, and it's a roller coaster and things are happening, quote unquote, to us. I would say things are happening for us. And your mind is an energy force, your mind is manifesting. So when you are able to hold that higher thought now, and then the next moment and the next moment, you begin to build a consistency that will create a habit. And this doesn't mean that it's happy. It doesn't mean like, oh, everything's awesome. I'm not talking about pretending. But even like the first one, in the face of a difficult situation, what's the attitude? Right. It might be, how do I fix this quickly? Going for the highest at all times. Oh man, it feels so much better.
Yeah. And I would take it one step further and say that in the current climate that we see, it's more important than ever, simply because that level of clarity is the thing that's going to help you stay stable and to keep you from getting swept up into any kind of chaos or drama or whatever else is going on. That is really, really important for you and for everybody that you touch in your life.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So exactly. Love it. Good stuff, right? All right. Earl Nightingale.
Yeah.
Wow. He was the dude. So again, we'll put a link to the book in the show notes, illuminationacademy.net/podcast. And, please share if this is relevant to someone, if you think it's going to help someone. Definitely helps us get the word out. And we so appreciate you tuning in, listening. Any comments, questions, put in the show notes, comments, or email info@sourcemovement.com.
Peace.
Namaste. Hey, thanks for jamming with us today. And if you enjoy Illumination Podcast, please go ahead and share it with someone you love. Give us a rating, review, download our podcast. And remember, you can find us at illuminationacademy.net/podcasts. Talk to you soon. Namaste.